Hi, everybody. I'm with Carissa Hickling, and we are talking about where talent acquisition is going, what it needs to evolve to become. And so we're going to be talking about how it needs to move upstream into. I'm actually going to take it maybe a little bit further than you would, Carissa, and that's into like the area of how do we complete the corporate tasks. And we can talk about it in the real sort of broad context of just getting stuff done, and then downstream into real business outcomes. So I think that we're in a world where the enterprise is changing shape a lot, and there's going to be a lot more. There's going to be a lot more outsourcing and contractors and fractional people, and it's going to be very different from the whole. We've got 20,000 employees, and this, and it might go up gradually over time, but I think it's going to be quite different, and it has become quite different over the last few years. Let's just start with this generally, like the shape of the organization, and then we'll go on to like where's TA to go in that.
Oh, absolutely. And I completely agree. And I really think that that's so important to sort of zoom out and have that much broader perspective, because nothing happens in isolation. And, last time we did talk a little bit about how, for TA, there's a two-job reality, and that is replicated across all organizations, meaning AI really is shifting many jobs from doing to directing. But there also is that judgment being a scarce resource. And so I think when we step back, it really is tough questions being asked now of organizations. What really is the nature of work? What is it that I need a human being to do? What is it that maybe I don't need to hire a bunch of people? Who do I have already in my organization that I should be looking at retraining and redeploying in different areas? And that's actually something I'd like to talk about in the context of TA. And also that question around borrowing talent, be it fractional roles, be it third-party contract outsourcing, be it creative partnership arrangements with some of the companies that you go into business with, and you say, hey, rather than us going out and hiring a bunch of people, you do this, I do this, let's meet somewhere in the middle. There are much more creative ways of resourcing. And I think that by extension then really challenge us to say, well, what is it that talent acquisition actually needs to become? Because as we talked about it, I said, I really think that we need to go upstream, and that is workforce design, but it also is very much before the requisition exists. It's really rethinking, what do we really need? It also, I believe, means going downstream into that accountability long after an offer is signed, or a contract for third-party contract staffing, or whatever the arrangement may be. And yet today, I think a lot of organizations are still sort of stuck in that middle piece, and they haven't yet unlocked going from jobs to resourcing, which I think is fundamentally different.
That middle piece. So if I can paraphrase what I think the middle piece is filling jobs. There is a vacancy.
It's what we've been doing today. Yeah. And I can maybe expand on that a little bit. I kind of think of this like dedicated TA in-house functions is actually something that came out of HR organizations, generalist line managers, and agencies. This as a dedicated specialist function is really only about 25 years old. I mean, it was sparked by LinkedIn, modern ATSs, and also the fact that the complexity of bringing people into your organization just got more and more. And we realized, aha, we maybe need to have a specialized function. And I mean, I've lived this, when I was at Birla Sun Life Insurance, and this was in India, it was my training team that taught the managers, sales managers, how to recruit. And then they did the business of the hiring. And yeah, we were part of it, but it was not a specialized function. But the world has gotten more complex. And that really prompted the building of the kind of TA functions that we think of now. And I think, especially because that's now increasingly under scrutiny, just as the nature of work is changing, resourcing approaches need to change. And that means also talent acquisition has an opportunity.
So yeah, and I think it isn't. I think that's a good word to describe it, an opportunity, because If we don't go, so let's talk about the upstream
Yeah.
movement
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
If we don't do that, we're going to get things done. In fact, we're going to do that. We're just going to get told how to do everything, right? And we're going to get continued to be treated as a service function that is there to deliver a short list and make sure
Yeah.
the person signs and turns up on time. Right?
Yeah.
So going upstream, what do we need
Yeah.
to do? Who do we need to be influencing? How do we make it happen?
Well, I mean, I think, that whole thing of like being an order taker. I mean, the classic thing is that, the hiring manager comes and says, I would like some burgers and fries, same as last time, just faster and cheaper. And the key thing here is that, instead of firing up that grill instantly, we need to pause and we need to stop and really go, so maybe we could try something like, I understand the urgency. But last time it came with some side effects, that really bad heartburn you had, and that's on top of that chronic high blood pressure and high cholesterol you've got. What if we designed together a tasty meal that would still fuel your hunger, but would avoid a much larger health crisis down the line? Same need, different solution, better outcome. That in a nutshell is an analogy for upstream TA. It's not about filling the rec faster. It's actually about challenging whether a job requisition is the right answer at all. And I think here there is an uncomfortable truth, which is that, there's so much hype around, automation is going to take care of all of this. Well, automation doesn't in its own deliver better outcomes. It just delivers faster outputs for whatever inputs were provided. And so this is really where I come to this thing of saying, if a role is poorly designed, if the brief reflects what the org chart needed yesterday, an AI agent is just going to fill faster with the wrong person at scale. And so you have to go upstream first. And I think this is nothing new. I mean, Gartner is even in some of their recent reports been very direct. They're saying, and I quote here, recruiters today must advise on talent strategy and role design and assess candidates fit for organization future needs, not just current role. Bang on. But how? And this is real work. I mean, there's somebody that's got to be redesigning that role before the machine matches it. Someone has to say, buy is the right answer, or just as we were talking about earlier, could a different borrow strategy actually be more effective for the uncertain times that we're in today? Or should we be going in-house and really looking at that build and partnering with learning and development to sort of say, how do we skill the people we have to be able to shift into this doing to, orchestrating? And I think, this is just it. It's a struggle, and most organizations don't have this solved.
So you remind me of one of the things that we do at Poetry is when the rec goes live, Poetry develops a full pack of assets for everything the
Yeah.
recruiter needs to do a great job. Within
Yeah.
the research area, we tell the recruiter all about the job and like what's the skills availability in that location and things like that. One of the things that we include in there is what's the potential for this role to become automated now or in the future. And so that would be another example of being able to say to the hiring manager, all of these 10 new contact center recs that you've just given me,
Yeah.
what are you thinking about in the context of actually this is a thing that the company needs to be, putting in automated systems for, being able to think beyond
Yeah.
what you just said. I want a burger and fries. There's your burger and fries. Yeah. Would that be another advising around like, I don't know,
Absolutely.
technology solutions or whatever? That would be another way of doing this.
And I think, TA, I think, is really uniquely positioned to lead some of these discussions because we already are being brought in that moment of change when the business is trying to translate need into a role. And they start off thinking, hey, leaders are saying, this is what I think I need. But we actually have access through tools like Poetry and many others to what the market supply can actually support. We are familiar enough because this is our expertise to have that feel for when an idealized job description or ideal candidate doesn't exist, and what is it that real humans are that are available and at what price points as well. And so there is that commercial element too. And I think, by going upstream, why not leverage this understanding to shape the capability or capacity gap and the way in which we're resourcing to fill that.
So I get this. I get my immediate instinct is that you need a really high level of skill to be able to do this. You need a lot of
Yeah.
emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
You need a lot of you need a lot of experience. You need to have had lots of conversations with business leaders so that you can
Yeah.
talk their language. And so it's going to be very difficult for somebody to come out of university and, I don't know, work in a recruitment agency for 2 years and then be able to influence the chief
Yeah.
technology officer around their hiring. So, I mean, I'm sure it can be learned, but it's probably like 10 years of experience before you can start to do this type of
Yeah.
stuff.
I think that's a really good point. And it actually brings me back to some of the training I used to do when I was a consultant, actually around how a consultant can start to build that understanding of an organization by asking effective questions, by not saying yes to the surface, but probing deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's just it. You have a hypothesis. The hypothesis is that we're going to be able to solve this resourcing challenge with X. Let's test that hypothesis. What is the evidence that this is going to work? What are the factors that are going into, what are the things that are changing around us? And you are right. It does mean that we probably will have true talent advisory being a critical knowledge and skill set. And let's be honest, the best talent advisors are actually then going to be those who also can combine that with institutional knowledge and the information not only from that upstream, but now I'd actually like to go into downstream, because I think this is the critical thing. You can't just sort of do upstream in isolation either. When we go into being more outcome measured, that's actually where the upstream intelligence comes from, because we're going from building our credibility on transactional metrics, because speed to fill a bad hire isn't excess. It's just costing our organization 3 times more money. I mean, so the signed offer now is no longer the finish line. We really do need to go into, business outcomes, performance at 6 and 12 months, time to productivity and retention. And what that means is it's also aligning up front what good looks like, but it also means going downstream to say, has this hire actually accelerated the team, not just individual performance, but the team? Have we been able to ramp up more effectively because of these resourcing decisions we made? Hey, did we get it right between the buy, build, borrow, or bought? Especially if we're doing borrow from a temporary period, are we now confident we should move into a buy decision? Or do we want to extend the borrow a bit longer? And this is just it, is that the very intelligence you need to go upstream comes from knowing what happens downstream. If you're tracking time to productivity, you know which role design works. If you're measuring 6-month performance, you know which wild card bets paid off. And I think that feedback loop really turns upstream advisory from opinions to actual grounded in insights and things that we can all say, yeah, we agree, we're moving in the right direction, or here's where course correction is necessary.
So the classic example of that would be when you're taking your rec on, you're doing your alignment meeting or whatever you call it, is tell me about the most high performing people in your team and tell me about their backgrounds and what is it about them that's made them successful. That would be the most common thing that recruiters today would do to identify like what does great success look like in this. But I think what you're saying is we can take that a lot further by understanding the objectives and key measurement, key like what is going to get that hiring manager, what is going to get them their bonus this year.
Yeah,
Um,
it's linking to the much wider business strategy. And here's where, smaller and medium-sized organizations, this is a tighter circle of understanding. When you get into some of the really, because I've worked with these sides of organizations too, and it's a lot easier to sort of be able to navigate some of these topics. But when you get into some mega organizations, and I've certainly worked with large enterprise ones like Siemens, it's wonderful, but it's incredibly complex. There is often a disconnect between a decision in the boardroom and a decision being made on the shop floor. And that's really where also having different ways of sharing information. And I think, talent acquisition, our channels of communications were like fantastic. We actually had to learn to be careful to not sort of pre-announce things because the local level, because we knew sometimes before the standard ways of communicating had reached the ground level. And I think, that's just it, is that tension between there's a wider strategy, it is being recalibrated. There are ways of understanding what's the change in priority. But I think, to me, it all comes down to things like at that execution level, that middle level, that operational engine. I think that is the one when we started off this conversation, it is under pressure. Margins are tight. We are not in the best economic climate. This is also where a lot of organizations are saying, well, if I can just automate recruiting, then maybe I don't need this TA function at all. And here's where absolutely an AI agent can absorb repeatable work. 100%. Yes, there are some RPOs that are doing brilliant work handling peak. I mean, gosh, some of the things like Randstad or Conferry, they can do scale with sophisticated AI and data capabilities. And yet, in order for this to be effective, I come back to saying you got to have a really good understanding of what you're trying to achieve. And if I can give an example, I mean, I've been completely blown away by the blueprint that Emirates has done with their volume hiring. And this, they published this last year. Like, this is not 2026, this is 2025. And what they did is they drove at that time to hire from 60 days to almost zero. They vetted over 300,000 applications, shortlisted 26,000, issued 2,500 offers with a 65% acceptance rate, largely automated. Holy Toledo. I mean, that is extraordinary. And they also, calculated that they'd freed up like 9,000 recruiter hours. But that actually is not replacing humans. That was a deliberate design. It was automating volume. It was redeploying humans to orchestrate the system, and they had to go upstream. They absolutely had to achieve something like that.
I mean, this is incidentally, shout out to Emirates. That's one of my favorite brands. I absolutely love flying.
They're
I love
amazing.
flying with them. I love everything about that company. That's
Yeah.
that's the Uberization of this
Yeah.
type of recruiting. And most people think of Uber as a taxi company. I don't. I think of it as a workforce management company. And I really believe that we can learn a huge amount from to drive like time to get somebody doing the job to zero.
Anticipating, yeah.
And it's wonderful to hear examples of businesses that have done that. And I agree with you. That is not replacing the job, the talent acquisition job. The talent acquisition, the opportunity to further enhance talent acquisition, the opportunity to further enhance the organization through the expert deployment of additional talent acquisition programs, which make the business run better, is upstream and downstream benefits for leadership.
Yeah. And I think, we are starting to see, like, I think it was, I see, I4CP, they put out a report, I think just 2 months back, where they were actually sharing that many TA organizations are already starting to restructure because they already are anticipating this. And they know that, you have to be evolving with business needs, and you've got to have a centralized hub and spoke, you've got to have more flexibility, and you also need to be more closely aligned with talent management, learning, workforce planning, whether you're playing an influential role in it or you are actively part of saying, that's great, however, early enough in the process to be able to be effective with the outcomes. Yeah.
So I want to just tie this conversation up by talking about this cliched conversation of getting a seat at the table, right?
Yeah.
It seems like if talent acquisition organizations are doing what you are suggesting, the seat at the table happens by default.
By
There is,
default.
it is undeniable, and you are there advising the CFO, the CIO, the CEO, and you're right there at that level.
Yeah, and you can't strategically get the job done any other way because the whole focus and purpose has shifted. And yet at the end of the day, it is still that middle engine is still happening. It's just there may be very different solutions brought in to bear there. And I've long been a big believer around total talent management. It should not be a hire, don't hire. We really, especially with the pace of change, we need that flexibility. Our organizations need that flexibility. Frankly, I mean, a lot of people now also are themselves open to saying, hey, yeah, I'll do that fractional role. That works better for me as well. And so, I think there are so many other solutions and possibilities out there. And I come back to that thing of saying someone needs to do this. So why not TA? Like, really, why not?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So last question.
Mhm.
And I know that you've seen over the last few months, you've seen a wide variety in like maturity levels of
Yes.
organizations when it comes to TA.
Yeah.
I anecdotally, I've got no facts on this at all. It's just anecdotal. I think there is a direct connection between how influential and embedded and sophisticated and able to achieve influence the TA leader and therefore TA team is within an organization, and how well performing as an organization it is. So when everybody in the company is a recruiter for the business, and it is a culture of TA is like a top priority inside the organization, I feel like that organization is performing a lot better than the one where there's a head of recruitment whose job is to fill vacancies.
Yeah, I mean, if we go back to my analogy, when you're sitting down across the table and designing the menu, you're creating a fabulous buffet, because I think also segmentation to me also plays a big role in this. I mean, it is never one size fits all. There are definitely some volume positions that have some standardization, but there's a lot of things that have got, let's say, different dietary preferences. And I think that's really where it gets exciting when you're designing that menu, when you're creating what should be in that buffet, the turnover of it versus just an assembly line and going through and saying burger and fries. I think to me, we have to be the ones designing the menu, putting together the buffet, that there's choice and that it's also relevant choice for the dietary needs of the people coming in, and that everybody walks out with a brilliant experience, but also thoroughly satisfied. And it just becomes a force multiplier of good.
You are really great at taking very, very complex issues and making them simple to understand. And I think that is a wonderful and vital leadership attribute. So,
Oh, thank you.
Carissa, thank you very much for joining me today. Really enjoyed it, and
Me too.
I will see you soon.
Sounds good. Ciao.